Perfect. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kanik Aguirre, Chair of the MVTC Legislative and Policy Committee. We are starting at 6:05 p.m. We are being live streamed on MVTC's YouTube page, and the WMATA Committee Chair, Mr. Matt DeFerranti, sends his regrets. He cannot be here tonight. We do not have a quorum, so we cannot bring in anyone electronically yet, but I believe if we get one more person, we will be able to. But since we don't have any other action items, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So we have our May 29th Joint Committee Meeting Summary in your meeting materials. Do any committee members have any changes to the meeting summary, comments, concerns? Forever hold your peace.
You can bring it back. You can go ahead and bring it back later.
Okay.
Because of our.
Well, just for
actually,
there we go. Look at that.
Perfect.
And I don't know if you want,
Okay,
just for
let me
the
go
sake
back.
of the room, to.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bring in Mr. Snyder first. So can I have a motion to approve Mr. Snyder's request to participate remotely?
So moved.
Thank you. There's a motion.
Second.
From Ms. Coffey. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. The ayes have it unanimously. We can now have Mr. Snyder participate remotely. Wonderful. I'd also like to recognize a former commissioner who is joining us tonight, Mr. Randy Mishnu. Thank you for being here. He is our at-large member, urban at-large member at the CTB, or Commonwealth Transportation Board, and hails from one of our MVTC districts. All right, now.
Gotta say which one.
Well, I was gonna let you do the honor.
Fairfax.
That's true.
So then I think we could come back to the summary. I don't think there was any edits, unless Mr. Letourneau, you have any raging concerns around the summary from last time. Take that as a no. So we can move on from the summary with a thumbs up. All right, we're gonna hop into our DRPT presentation on merit to start us off, and the proposed changes to making efficient and responsible investments in transit for the grant program. The merit program provides both capital and operating assistance to all Virginia Transit providers except WMATA and VRE based on funding formulas. As discussed at the September 4th Commission meeting, DRPT is proposing changes to both the operating and capital formulas, and DRPT staff are here to present additional information on the proposed changes and impacts to transit providers across the Commonwealth. While DRPT is making this proposal, it is ultimately the Commonwealth Transportation Board that would consider and approve any changes. In these discussions, you may have also heard another acronym, TSDAC, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. MVTC Executive Director, Ms. Kate Mattice, is appointed to TSDAC by the Virginia Transit Association. TSDAC's role is to advise DRPT on this process, but it is ultimately CTB that has authority to make these changes. So I'm going to turn it over to DRPT staff who have joined us virtually. And
I think we have
Ms. Robinson, or is it Zach Trotman?
Good evening. Do you all prefer we be on camera when we're presenting, or do you all have any preference or requirement or anything else?
We do not have a requirement, whatever you're most comfortable with.
All right. Well, I think we have to be on while we're
slide.
presenting. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that was a great introduction. You've actually probably handled a couple of our slides, which is great. Again, my name is Zach Trognan. I'm the Chief of Public Transportation with DRPT. And I'm also joined this evening, I think Sarah Hussein is in the room with you all. She's our manager of Northern Virginia Transit Programs. Also on Zoom is Tiffany Dubinsky, our Director of Transit Planning. And also Grant Sparks, who you'll hear from in a second, is our manager of statewide transit programs. And then I believe Dan Sonnenclair is out there, who's one of our transit program managers. We like DRPT to have a deep bench, so we bring a lot of people. So could we see the next slide very quickly? As the chair said, we're here to talk a little bit about merit, and he described it very well. It's both capital and operating. It's our system for allocating, our process for allocating funding. So with that, I'd like to quickly jump into the capital program, and Grant, if you're out there, he's going to touch on that in a couple slides.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So before we go into our proposed changes for our capital program, first, just a very quick history of the program. First of all, it is a discretionary capital program, and it has been, I think, since inception. So we've had this program for a number of years, but the last major overhaul of the program came back in 2018 with the creation of Merit. And leading up to the policy changes in 2018, DRPT worked closely with TISDAC, which was mentioned earlier, to develop a prioritization process for capital funding. So that resulting policy had two guiding principles. It favored state of good repair projects, so asset replacement projects over asset expansion projects. And it also favored projects that had a more direct impact on the delivery of transit services. So any project that was more operational in nature, as opposed to like administrative activities, were favored. So the 2018 policy, which is actually still almost entirely intact, separates projects and associated state match rates into three primary buckets. Those buckets being state of good repair, or SGR, with a state match rate of 68%. The minor enhancement program, or MIN, with a 68% state match rate as well. And then our third being major expansions, which has a 50% maximum state match rate. So the eligible grantees under the Merit Capital Program, since 2018, WMATA has been ineligible, but every other transit agency in Virginia has been eligible for this discretionary program. And then a couple of years ago, VRE was pulled out. They are no longer eligible for Merit Capital funding because they actually now get a direct allocation from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. So they no longer have to compete for these funds every year. But in general, the methodologies that were developed as part of the 2018 process have been pretty successful in prioritizing and funding our capital projects in alignment with DRPT goals. Next slide, please. So as part of this effort to make recommendations for improving the current Merit Capital Program and associated policy, DRPT and our consulting team identified a few policy changes for consideration, which respond to some of the key findings as we went through the evaluation process of the program. So on the left here in this table, you can see those key findings, and on the right, you can see the associated improvements for consideration. So the top one, we found that some of the projects didn't really fit neatly within the existing categories. Those three categories being that state of good repair, minor enhancement, and major expansion. Don't need to go into all the details, but we had to, like, based on the project type that was being applied for, sometimes we had to make some administrative calls as to which bucket to put it in because it wasn't always clear. So the potential improvements for consideration here is to really formalize what we've already been doing since 2018 by creating two SGR buckets, one specifically for vehicles and another SGR bucket for everything else. We also are proposing to add subcategories for our major expansion projects. So the major expansion program as it is today, it's as it sounds. It's intended for projects that are capacity expansion type projects, but also those projects have a $3 million threshold. So any project that's over $3 million total cost triggers it to be a major expansion project. We ran into some issues with facility projects in particular. As you can imagine, we fund facility replacement projects, and many of those are over that $3 million threshold. So it was really kind of awkward to score it as a major expansion project when really it was a state of good repair project in nature. So we're just formalizing that change as well. But because we're creating this new kind of subcategory in our major program specific to SGR projects, we are going to be developing a new scoring methodology for that subprogram. The second one down here, as we reviewed the program, we did identify a provision in the current policy which requires that any vehicle expansion project of more than 5 revenue vehicles or 5% of an agency's fleet would need to be scored as a major expansion project. I don't believe since 2018 that we've had to actually classify any projects or applications rather using this provision. And so we're proposing to just eliminate it. We feel as though it's actually making it it's de-emphasizing the need to apply for any significant vehicle expansion project because we're not receiving many applications or any under that provision. The third one here listed and the final one for capital is that we have one aspect of our current prioritization, which is called an incentive score, which, for lack of a better term, gives bonus points for certain types of transit capital projects. We found as we did this analysis that those bonus points weren't really having much of an impact on the intended results. And so through this process, we are actually proposing to remove those current incentive scores and kind of reclassify them by adding a couple categories that focus less on certain types of projects and more on good grants management. So as transit capital projects costs continue to increase, they have over the last few years. Good grants management, we feel is a top priority because it really rewards agencies for completing their projects quickly and closing out any leftover money at the end of their capital project in a timely manner.
Thank you,
So
Grant.
those are the three kind of high level recommendations that we are proposing for the capital program. And I don't know, Zach, if you want to add anything or go right into operating.
No, I think we'll jump right into operating and if there's time for questions at the end, but thank you, Grant. Thank you. So as Grant said, the programs for merit were overhauled back in 2018, and that included operating in tandem with capital. And so as you see here, some of the things I came away with was that operating the one of the core ideas is to balance the need for reliable annual funding with the reliability of performance data, and they came away with these policy goals. So I may be biased, but it's hard to argue with some of those. So we are still pursuing those same goals today with the program, thanks to TISDAC as well. TISDAC identified those. So next slide. And so our current formula, there's 2 required steps to this. And as you see, the first one, this may not mean anything, but it's a sizing metric is the first step. And basically what this is it's a way to figure out how much service, an agency provides, and it gives us some way of sort of comparing the myriad agencies and sizes we have over the state. And so, as Cindy Mester might say, we use things like cost as a proxy for the size of an agency. And then there's some performance metrics in this sizing as well about ridership, vehicle revenue hour, vehicle revenues, miles as well. But again, operating costs is sort of that proxy for how big an agency is. And so we use that to help establish the baseline for that. And then the second step is the performance adjustment. And then there's sometimes a third step. If you go to the next slide, we'll show that a little more. This we took, over these years, we finally have kind of come to something where we could maybe try to show how this plays out, although the math behind it is still very, very difficult and very complex. But this shows the impacts potentially of when you go through the sizing weight in this illustration. this particular agency is getting almost 20% of the entire allocation. Just for illustration's sake, the operating program may have we've been looking at about 114, 115 up to $120 million a year. The capital that Grant just talked about, maybe $80 million a year. So just the scale of these programs. But so the agency may have as much as 20% after their sizing metric is established. And you can see here that's $26 million. Then we apply these performance metrics. And in this case, they show a negative percentage as compared to the statewide average trend. These are trends as well. They use trends. And so we come away, that actually takes some money from them in the sizing metric. And then we have this third step. If there's money left over to allocate, it goes back into the formula and goes back through the process again. So actually this agency would have lost money on the performance metrics, but then they get some money back from the reallocation. That's if funds are available. And just another point of reference, the CTB policy requires that all the funds are expended or allocated, excuse me, in the operating program. So that's a CTB policy. All right, the next slide. So the challenges that we see and from the operating program over the years we've been doing it is that, we saw in that one sizing metric that over half of that, well, half of that is for what we might call inputs, the cost. And rather than the outputs or performance things, we want to see like certain levels of service you're providing in ridership. And so that's just been something we've been looking at, is that 50% being allocated for that. And then also, as you see from that illustration, the complexities make it difficult sometimes for us both to explain it to grantees, as well as them to understand with all the trends and years and everything else in there. So the trend adjustments are a difficult thing to explain, the complexity and the timeline. And also, just so everybody understands, what the agencies are getting every year is changing, and so it's always something year over year, looking at these long timelines. So it does make it difficult for everybody to know what they might get in a given year, and to really predict that. And also the revenue can go up or down, and so that's gonna impact what they might get as well, and what obviously what goes into the formula. And then the metrics, that's sort of the same thing as the last bullet. An agency could choose to do a certain type of service. They could choose to expand. They could choose to contract some, and that will impact everyone across the board. This is a zero-sum game. When somebody gains some money, somebody else is going to lose. And so all these things can play into what an agency can get. All right, next slide. So when we undertook this review, and let me go to that last bullet on this page first. The review, we have a statutory requirement to look at the operating formula every 3 years. That's not the same for the capital, but we do TSDAC, which again, your executive director is on, and some folks in Northern Virginia, has to review this every 3 years. So that's what also sort of started this effort. But our goals that we arrived at as we were starting this were to try to simplify it some, as I just talked about the complexity, to change some of that input focus to more outcome focused metrics, and then also just to see that we were incentivizing operational efficiency. Again, probably in that sizing metric by changing the focus off the operating costs a little bit to something else. So next slide, please. So with that, this is what we've come up with as a proposed way to adjust our current operating process. So we would still have a sizing metric. Again, it's good to be able to compare agencies, many different agencies across sizes and offerings, but to decrease the weight that's given to operating costs by a percentage and increase those that are given to some of these performance things like ridership, revenue hours, vehicle revenue hours, and revenue miles. And then also you saw that the performance metrics were really tied to the sizing metric in the two. We wanted to isolate that a little bit, and make the performance set aside a little more transparent, in order to incentivize those things. And so I'll show you in a second what that impact is some. And also we're going from what were 5 performance metrics to 3, which should also simplify it as well. And so next slide. So this was where the most of the complexity came in, is the performance trend adjustment versus something which we're talking about going to more direct performance measurement. So you may see on my left there, your right potentially on the slide, is the trend approach that we use currently. And so just to illustrate a point is that agency A, who has kind of absolute high performance, but has a flatter or even a slightly negative trend compared to the statewide average, could lose in that second step of the current formula and have some money taken away because their trend is lower than the statewide average. Agency B, which may not have great absolute performance, could actually see an increase from the current performance trend approach. So as you see on the right side, you see on my right, your left, you see what we're talking about is agency A now, would still be higher absolute performance, but also wouldn't be what you might say punished by losing some money from the performance trend, but gaining some because their performance was still satisfactory. Agency B could still also get a performance bump, but it wouldn't be at the expense of agency A basically because the trends we've changed that trend approach. So we think that's rewarding, better performance while also simplifying it some. So again, under trends, a good performing agency could actually lose money from what they would have also otherwise gotten. And so that was something that we were certainly looking to change. So that's really the end of my presentation. So any questions?
Thank you, Chief Trogdon. I was going to take a look at the room real fast, see if we had a question. Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, frankly, I was sort of struggling to keep up.
Sure.
A lot of this is new to me. I'm not familiar with a lot of this, but it does look like there are some pretty significant changes. And I think you did a great job explaining them. I guess my question is, how are these changes being phased in?
Sure.
What's the timeline look like?
Yeah. Well, no, so we would not implement this, and I didn't say it on the slide, but obviously caught it till fiscal year 28 because our timeline is normally like this fall we're going to be opening up the fiscal year 27 grant period, and so we have guidance that we put out. Agencies are prepared for that. So actually it would be another year before we'd even begin implementing this because then we would be into the fiscal year 28 cycle. We'd have to get agencies prepared for this. I would probably saying that I think the changes are significant in a good way, but it's keeping a lot of the great things about it too. And we think, rewarding the performance agencies, we talked about this in TISDAC some, that agencies have been trying to make changes that will help them do better in the formula. And we think that will still be the case. The changes they've been making will still be rewarded, even with this, proposed approach. So I hope that comes through a little bit. But no, you're correct that we wouldn't even be making these changes till fiscal year 28 at the earliest.
Okay, appreciate that, and thank you for working with the jurisdictions. I think it's going to be important for everybody to understand what the impacts are. So thank you.
Now, Chief Trogdon, speaking of timelines, can you remind me when this got started?
We had started the review back in about April. We were engaging some consultants and starting to just review getting some background data on historical data and things like that through our program.
This year, right?
Yeah, April of 25. Yeah, I believe is when we.
And I think and correct me if I'm wrong. I think I heard you say that the formula hadn't been changed since 2018, or that something started in 2018.
That's when the program was overhauled. And so, we've been learning every year about some of these impacts and such, working with the trends, working with COVID money and everything else. So it's just trying to work with how this thing is playing out.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess some of my sentiment is, given that there hasn't been any major change since 2018, and I don't know what your usual process for bringing in a change like this is, but given how complex it is, and that especially for some of the smaller jurisdictions across the state where it might need some additional time to try and analyze this, was there any consideration for deferral or to extend this time period out a little bit longer?
I mean, that's something we'd have to talk with CTB about. I think, we have a public comment period that would be coming up in October. And so, we're just certainly trying to get the word out and explain these changes the best we can right now, and taking feedback such as, this group is one can give. And then we're meeting with your management advisory committee next week. So just taking that feedback, and we'll pass that on to our policymakers as well.
No, I really appreciate that, and I guess I hope you'll take this as one member of this body, and I don't want to speak for everyone else, but given the size of the changes and the timeline that we're kind of looking at, I would appreciate a little bit more time for analysis, even if we were to push this out a few more months, just to make sure we're dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's, so that the localities have a chance to really take a look at it. But anybody else?
I agree with what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated.
I don't know if you can see the room in here, but there's a lot of
Yeah,
nodding
yes,
heads
sir.
in agreement.
Sure. No, understand. I'll certainly take that back. Yeah, certainly take that back.
I appreciate that. Anyone else?
Well, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, so one of the things that the commission did authorize me to provide comments on behalf of the commission, so actually the words I'm hearing are going to be very helpful. And I know, and Chief Trogdon know, there's, this is a very complicated process. The ability to understand these changes, and it's tough because the staff have been asked to work in a pretty aggressive timeline. A lot of that was over the summer. I know many of the localities do not meet over the summer, so whether the staff may have had thoughts or comments, they haven't probably even been able to brief any of you on these. So I think it's going to be really important. If I hear correctly, Chief Trogdon, this will be presented at CTB, or is that still unclear if the October CTB is when something's going to be presented?
No, I think that's still unclear. We have a
Okay, and that's fine. Is there
right.
anything helpful that we can provide other than obviously the feedback you're hearing tonight, and that can help inform how this is handled at the October CTB meeting?
I'll have to communicate back with you on that. I'll run
Okay.
that to our agency and see, like I said, your commission's kind of giving you the ability to speak, so we'll certainly communicate about that if you like.
Okay, I appreciate that.
See if there's
Ms.
something.
Coffey.
I would just share that the changes to merit came up at the Virginia Association of Counties Transportation Policy Committee meeting, and the general feeling was really less about the content, and I think people were just focused on the timeline and feeling like, I don't even know what to make of this content, and now we're already being asked to provide comment and assessment, but like, how do I do that when I haven't really metabolized what I'm looking at yet? And obviously, it's a very numeric process, but it takes into account a lot of different things. And so I think different agencies have different sizes of transit staff. And I think it just gives it gives me, I shouldn't speak on behalf of anyone else, but a little bit of anxiety, at least with respect to like, we're in some precarious budget times. And if we don't have the opportunity to really understand the out year impact of this, it could end up really harming service of transit agencies that are doing a good job right now. And so I think the more careful and intentional we can be about this, the better off, everyone in the Commonwealth will be as far as transportation service.
Any last questions, comments? No? Well, Chief Trogdon, I just want to say thank you to you and your team for spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you all again.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move to item number 4, which is a series of items related to our work establishing long-term sustainable funding for public transit in our region. Mr. Duvetter will provide an update on DMV moves and SJ28. We will also preview this year's annual report on WMATA, and Ms. McGrane will guide us through a handful of funding and policy issues for discussion. Mr. Duvetter, please.
Thank you, Chair Aguirre. We have a number of dense agenda items later on the agenda. So these next few slides are really meant to be a quick process update to help set the stage for the content that is to come. So DMV moves is that DC, Maryland, Virginia, WMATA board and COG board effort. Their next task force meeting is on October 29th. Where that group currently stands is with an investment concept for WMATA of 450 to 500 million a year, starting in fiscal 28 and then growing at 3%. And that is for mostly state of good repair and sort of rail modernization of the system. So that is one of the primary focuses of that group. They are also looking to have the region commit to some bus priority corridors, so a lot more information to come on that. They're also looking at a regional integration action plan that'll have a number of items to help bring our various transit agencies together to create a more seamless system. And then the DMV Moves group will take those recommendations to the WMATA and COG boards sometime in November. So a lot of process to come on that. We will have more conversations at committee and commission as those groups advance, but I just want to set the stage for the joint committees here tonight. For SJ 28, that is a Virginia General Assembly joint subcommittee. NVTC is providing staff technical resources to that effort. So their next meeting is on October 21st at the Alexandria WMATA building on Eisenhower Avenue. What the subcommittee will be discussing in October is transit agency needs as well as a cost containment discussion. That group last reviewed revenue estimates for I think 14 sources back in June. And then we'll be hard at work to at a possibly being rescheduled, trying to figure out the right date in November subcommittee meeting to have a final set of recommendations on how to meet those needs with revenues as well as sort of other topics. So it's a very Virginia specific dive. It is more than just Metro. So those are underway. I do want to also put a reminder out here that I think as was mentioned previously, fiscal 25 WMATA budget had that very large operating revenue gap. The region, DC, Maryland, and Virginia made additional regional investments to help stave off those severe service cuts and kind of keep service going. And as Sophie demonstrated in the PAC meeting on our ridership presentation, ridership is up. So there's been some pretty significant dividends from that investment. The investment in Virginia was made with 2 years of general fund revenues from the Commonwealth and was matched by our local governments. And so the point of this slide is to illustrate that that was a temporary solution. And so that one of the main priorities of Virginia here is to identify a permanent long-term solution so that in fiscal 27, with the suspension of the 3% cap, WMATA rebaselined its operating budget. So absent a solution here, there's a pretty significant lift for our local jurisdiction. So that's just something I want to put make sure folks are aware of that now, and that there's going to be, I think one of the main focuses of the subcommittee is to find that solution.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I also want to mention too, just so people are aware that WMATA itself also stepped up to the plate.
Absolutely.
Yep. Jurisdictions and states coming forward with money. You know, significant, Metro made significant savings throughout the organization.
Absolutely.
You know, sort of forensic review, you know, what was going on. So that
and fair increases.
And slight.
Yep. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that, and that the DMV Moves portion I just mentioned is something that that effort is slated in fiscal 28. So there's a bit of a timing issue that we'll talk more about. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Adam Hager to give a brief update on the WMATA annual report process.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Indeed, very brief, just 2 slides, high-level preview of what's coming down the pipeline as far as our annual report on WMATA. So this is our 8th installment of this report. We are busy working on the content right now. Again, this is a state-mandated report spelled out in code that we produce each year and submit to the governor in Journal Assembly by December 15th. So the primary thing that we cover in the report is strategies to reduce the costs and efficiency of operations. And so while that's the focus of the report, there are other items of importance to the commission that we speak to in each year's report beyond what's mandated in code. There are some unique timing considerations this year. So of course, as Andrew just highlighted, SJ 28 DMV Moves, they're wrapping up this fall. This will capture a point in time of where those processes are, but not quite fully wrapped up. So just wanted to mention that. On the next slide, just as far as the overall structure and content, again, the focus this year, of course, is a recommendation for a long-term funding solution for WMATA. We're going to highlight a lot of their recent successes. For those of you that are engaged in the Metro Board space, of course, there were a lot of items that came out last week as far as ridership numbers, safety with crime being down 50% over the last 2 years, costs and operational efficiency sort of initiatives that they put together over the last several years. So we want to tell that story. We're also looking again to sort of document the DMV moves and SJ28 activities, kind of what are the elements, if you will, that comprise this long-term funding solution. And then, of course, the commission has already spoken to a lot of these things over the last several months. So there were some resolutions back in January and then again in July of this year, where the commission offered feedback, guidance, direction to both of those efforts. Beyond that, again, there's some positions that the commission has laid out over the last several years when it comes to items of importance in the metro space. So just to highlight a couple that we're working on, one is labor costs and overtime. So that was a topic again that we spoke to last year. The need for a reserve fund, opportunity for a jurisdictional audit. And then back at our May committee meeting, Mr. Letourneau asked us to talk as well about the relationship with the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. So we'll have some language there really that just speaks to looking for quicker safety outcomes when there are impasses between the two bodies.
Adam, 1 second. Mr. Smolberg.
With the audits, are you talking about the states cooperating to do one audit? Because I know that was something that, because they all approach it looking at different little thing. I mean, you have like 7 audits that WMATA that, and there just seems to be a lot of redundancy.
That's precisely it.
Okay.
So there's some big opportunity there. We've got some language that speaks to the benefit of doing that. Right.
And then,
And that is something that we've had in prior reports, so it's kind of.
yeah, it flows. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. Just wanted to clarify that. And then second, are you going to look at the Better Bus Initiative as because of the first overhaul in the bus system, bringing more service, more efficient service at the same cost? Are there any lessons we can learn there? I don't know.
We'll definitely have some highlights as far as some of the features and benefits of the new network, as far as lessons learned, say, with it just having started this summer.
Yeah.
But we will have some early ridership figures. I think that there's a couple routes in particular in Virginia that were slightly restructured that are seeing higher ridership already. So we'll be sure to call that out as far as get some highlights.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of SJ28, DMV moves as you're looking at dedicated corridors in certain areas, certain efficiencies like that. Bus in particular.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr.
Yeah,
Letourneau.
and just one thing quick, to be precise on the MSC thing, I think it was also having an independent arbiter to be able to mediate disputes between Metro and MSC, because currently, and when there is a dispute, you only can appeal to MSC itself, who surprisingly has denied all these appeals.
There's
So-
a judge and jury.
Yes, and there are very legitimate differences of opinion based on the technical expertise that exists at Metro, which is in some cases much more experienced than at MSC, but there's no way to ever arbitrate these things. So that should be really clear.
And DC and Metro asked for the same thing, right?
Yeah. Maryland,
Or Maryland.
DC and Maryland, yes. I think all the jurisdictions were aligned on.
Okay, well, final point here, just as far as
All of them, yeah.
Everybody.
as far as the timeline goes, again, we'll have a briefing for the commission in November with hopefully a full draft in our kit so that everybody has a chance to review that, and then look for commission approval of the report in December before submission to the state. Happy to take any quick questions before we switch over to Ann.
Quick questions? No? Thanks, Mr. Hager. Ms. McGray?
Thank you. So I'm just going to cover some key transit funding and policy issues that we're going to see reflected in the draft legislative agenda, just for some context. So earlier this year, we did brief you on our interactive transit funding guide, and I just mentioning this because a lot of the things I'm going to mention are probably covered in more detail in that guide, but just key themes to remember that kind of continue to come up are there are limited sources for operating funding, operating expenses for transit. There are generally a lot more for capital expenditure expenses, and the sources we have aren't keeping up with the rising costs. Next slide. So at the statewide level, most transit funding does flow through the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, with the notable exception being what we've already mentioned a couple of times tonight, which is that general fund one-time stopgap measure in fiscal years 25 and 26. So that is not a typical way to fund transit out of Richmond. And so this is something that we are certainly looking at for the future to find a more sustainable source for that. And the CTF is really a great resource for transportation funding because it is diversified with many revenue sources, and it also is allocated via a formula. So it is kind of predictable. You have predictability in what you receive. And then the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, which we've discussed also a few times tonight, is really the key place for transit funding, for state aid of transit funding. And so 46.5% of that goes to NVTC to reimburse all of our local jurisdictions' metro subsidy payments. But then what the DRPT staff was talking about tonight of the merit program, 24.5% is for that operating costs to our local agencies, and then 17% to capital costs.
1 second, Mrs. Mum.
Could a point of information? So I missed the director's first
Oh,
part of his presentation. So the changes they're making, is it
it's
primarily in this main fund here, the transit fund, or the?
specifically that 24.5% of operating costs and 17%.
That's
So
the
it's
operating.
not relating to
And capital.
WMATA or BRE. BRE and Metro have those direct 3.5 and 46.5. So it's your connector, it's your dash, it's your arc.
Okay.
So the operating part
The operating
is
part.
here. Capital is somewhere else.
Somewhere else. but-
Capital is the 17%, which also is having some changes. You referenced them at the beginning. They're just slightly, less in depth. Next slide, please. And so this chart is showing specifically those merit operating funds where we're talking about the formula potentially changing. And what we have been seeing recently is just a situation of the revenues that are coming through the CMTF are not keeping up with the costs. The state may fund up to 30% of an agency's operating budget, but of course that becomes difficult as costs for all the agencies continue to grow, and the state revenues are, growing more slowly or plateauing. So this chart was shown to TSDAC, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, in May, and the dark blue bars show the projected increases in revenue for available operating funding, so what the state can provide. And the light blue is then the projected growth in operating costs. So obviously, as those bars get farther away from each other, the likelihood of the state being able to get 30% of that operating funding decreases. This isn't a new issue. What is new is that we've started to run out of the one-time allocations from pandemic era relief funding that they were kind of using to plug gaps for the past few years. And so it's more, this is going to be a theme throughout my slides. There's kind of like these small reductions potentially in the proportion of aid that different sources can give. And, at the end of the day, the locals are left with the bill. So on that note, I will continue to the next slide. So at the regional level, a really important funding source for transit is the regional gas tax. Since it was first levied in MVTC in 1981, it's been a pretty key tool for our jurisdictions to use to pay for their WMATA capital and operating subsidies. Of course, in addition also to that state aid that we were referencing in the state slides. So you'll notice that in fiscal 2019, the regional gas tax revenue is split into 3 funds. So this is after the 2018 legislation that created the WMATA Capital Fund and the Commuter Rail and Operating Capital Fund, or CROC, which gives money to BRE. And so this legislation, it actually did some helpful things that established the floor for the gas tax and increased the taxing amount to accommodate these new funds. But what you also see, what kind of inherently happens from this, is that you have what used to be all of this gas tax revenue going to MVTC to pay for operating and capital expenses is now a little less flexible. Parts of it are coming off to support mainly capital funds. And so the green is the kind of NVTC net collections from then, and you can see that there are some swings as these set amounts for WMATA and CROC are taken off the top, and then the NVTC net gas tax remains. Next slide, please. And then just to look at these 3 funds in a little bit more detail, just want to kind of talk about their purchasing power when you compare the fiscal 19 to fiscal 25. So WMATA Capital and CROC are both, it's just a set amount of funding. So 154.5 for WMATA Capital, 15 million for CROC. So in the previous slide, you would have seen a smaller amount for WMATA Capital. It has multiple sources funding it to get to that 154.5. But so when you adjust those fiscal 25 amounts for inflation, really the purchasing power for WMATA Capital is about 123 million in the fiscal 2019 dollars and 12 million for CROC. So this becomes an ongoing issue. You know, those pots will continue to at least feel smaller as inflation rises. The net regional gas tax is a bit more complicated of a story. And I think partially it also starts to emphasize this importance of having potentially more than one source for a fund. So when you compare the fiscal 2019 and 25 actuals, the dollar amount is almost the same. And over that time, it kind of took a bit of a journey, a dip, and now a recovery. But the purchasing power is about $7 million less. So again, this means that there's less to split among the local jurisdictions to support Metro. And so you have to inherently make that up with other funds. And so what we're seeing broadly is that, you know, dedicated funding sources for transit are less likely to cover the same proportion of a bill that they did in the past. And I actually do, you know, want to make one note of kind of a potential like lesson for future regional transit funding, in that the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority kind of had a similar redirection, as I'm sure everyone knows, in 2018, and they were able to advocate for the return of certain funds, and also the sales tax that just kind of inherently kind of tracks the economic conditions a little bit more. So that is kind of a lesson to take into the future transit funding of how different sources can kind of help back up others when maybe they're doing less well. Next slide, please. And so one of the weaknesses with the gas tax is that the future is uncertain. In the past, the gas tax served as a really good proxy for roadway use. But as cars have become more efficient or even fully electric, the connection between the fees you pay through the gas tax and the mileage you drive has kind of frayed. And so the state moved to fix this issue when it enacted a statewide highway use fee, or HUF, in 2020. And so this is a fee that you have levied during the vehicle registration process, which is a sliding scale where if your car is better than 25 miles to a gallon or electric, you pay some amount. And so it's kind of the HUF is almost a midterm solution to maybe a future where you have mileage-based fees. There is a optional program in Virginia at the statewide level you can participate in, but it's not, you know, all encompassing. But so with the importance of the regional gas tax to NVTC and also to all parts of Virginia, everyone has a regional gas tax. It makes sense to establish a regional HUF that essentially works in the same way the statewide one does, for kind of the similar reason. And this was a recommendation of JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, in its 2021 report on transportation infrastructure and funding. Thank you. So we arrive at the local level. Earlier in the year, we did a review of fiscal 25 adopted budgets for the NVTC jurisdictions, and we found that there's already about $250 million in general fund revenue that is being used to pay for either the Metro bill or funding local transit or VRE. So as we think about all the potential shifts in revenue that I've just discussed at statewide and regional levels, as I kind of set up at the beginning of this talk, local jurisdictions have to pay those bills and have to figure out how to generate that money locally. And of course, the property tax is one of the few tools that local jurisdictions can leverage, which of course is already paying for a wide variety of things. So the hope is that with new tools to support these needs, you know, that have many different sources, whether it's the example of the CTF, just offering some sort of stability and maybe ability to not rely quite so much on the property tax. Next slide.
And could I just go back, Mr. Chairman? So to the previous slide, that's a really good slide. So basically, and I know some jurisdictions, you know, have different strategies than others in terms of revenue. So revenue on the revenue side.
Yeah, revenue.
But That said, so basically this is the 250 million is operating and capital, an estimate, is that right?
Right, we looked in the adopted budgets of all the jurisdictions at any general fund transfers they had to their transit funds. So if
Okay.
it was Metro or VRE or. So it's a bit of it's not a perfect number, but it's the best we kind of could do in the.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to sort of bring it down to the level, again, maybe not for you, but for everybody else. I mean, we're basically talking a few cents on the real estate tax.
Yeah.
So
At least.
roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
You know, I have a question on this one here. So, no, that one. So the no, the other one.
Oh, the
Pie chart.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry, the pre-match. Is that, what are we hearing? I mean, is there any word of, just given all that's happening on
I have no, oh,
everything?
so PREA is sailing through on the appropriations of the federal side.
Yeah,
We are not hearing
okay.
anything about it at the state level. Like
Okay.
it's still it's literally in code.
Yeah,
So,
okay, all right.
so maybe no news is good news, but
No news.
yeah.
Okay, all right, just asking. There should have been a asterisk or something. Okay.
So with this pie chart showing the fiscal 26 breakdown of Virginia payments to Metro, showing whether the funding comes from local jurisdictions or the Commonwealth. Right now, we're sitting at about a 50-50 split when you trace the WMATA Capital Fund revenues to whether they're regional sources or state sources. So the main point to call out here is that darkest blue section of pie, that's that additional state aid from the general fund that we're expecting only to be a 2-year stopgap solution. So if we don't figure out how to pay for that rebaselining, which we were just talking about at the state level, that dark blue section would essentially become green, representing a local responsibility. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So just things to kind of carry with you into the conversations tonight. I think I've probably hammered these points home. I'll maybe let the slides speak for itself and we can move on and keep the agenda. Thank you. I'll happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Nice job.
Nice job. Thanks, Ms. McGrain. All right, we're gonna go ahead and jump to the next item, number 5, which is the 2026 General Assembly look ahead. We anticipate a busy session next year as we work with members of the House of Delegates and State Senate partners and stakeholders to secure long-term sustainable funding for transit in Northern Virginia and Commonwealth-wide. With the election of a new governor and all seats in the House of Delegates up in November, MVTC has been working to lay the groundwork for the 2026 session. We'll continue to do so before January. I'd now like to turn it over to MVTC's legislative liaison, Mr. Watkins, for a look ahead to the 2026 General Assembly session. Always good to have you, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start by noting, as you mentioned, all statewide offices and 100 seats of the House of Delegates are up for election on November 4th. The early voting does begin tomorrow, so if you want to stop getting mail, you can vote tomorrow. Take it all, easy on your inboxes for the rest of the year. The few polls that we have and the money raised in most competitive elections show us that most prognosticators are going to handicap Democrats with a likely advantage at the ballot box for governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, and a continued majority in the House of Delegates. As a reminder, Democrats currently hold a 51-49 majority in the House and a 21-19 majority in the Senate, though that majority would briefly shrink to 21-19 if Senator Ghazala Hashmi is elevated to lieutenant governor. Whoever takes the majority this November is going to have their work cut out for them to deliver on their campaign promises. With growing economic headwinds and downward pressure from changes to federal funding streams, putting the squeeze on state budgets nationwide, and meaning there will be limited pots of discretionary funds to spend. As we know, gone are the days of federal funding influxes of relief spending and soaring tax withholding numbers. We can expect appropriators to tighten their belts as they look at to backfill giant holes, and I'm talking about billions with a B left from HR1 in SNAP and Medicaid pots, as well as the potential need to infill the massive premium spikes caused by the end of Obamacare marketplace subsidies and their impact on the healthcare system writ large this December if there isn't additional federal action taken. Elected officials have also signaled a reticence to outlay money on ongoing programs as they fear a potential economic downturn in 2027 as inflation and the job market both look shaky and core Virginia industries are hit hardest by federal policies. Think agriculture, federal workforce, and the port as a triumvirate of problems for the state. As House Appropriations Chairman Torian said in public remarks to his colleagues last week, we should be mindful of the expectations we bring to Richmond in January 2026. So some stirring words from the chairman there about what kind of fiscal standpoint we will be in. However, on a brighter note, we have been proactive in our conversations with key Money Committee staff and senior members in briefings this fall in ensuring that transit is a part of the conversations when they look at what areas of the budget they need to fund as they look to create new revenue streams and ensure their bases are covered from a core services perspective. That message, I think, is resonating in Richmond. The NVTC team's work to come up with models of revenue generation through SJ 28 is certainly gaining us some political points with Money Committee staff, which is good news for our work to be included in any system-wide funding solution to any revenue shortfalls. So while we face pretty steep headwinds from any sort of large funding streams, there's some good work going on up here and down in Richmond currently. Key dates we need to be aware of in Richmond. Governor Youngkin will present his outgoing biennial budget in December to the joint money committees, an important framework for the biennium, which will be promptly discarded as appropriators begin working on their own priorities, as is tradition at the Capitol. The legislature gavels in on January the 14th, and the governor will be sworn in 3 days later, needing to formally appoint and confirm the entirety of her cabinet, along with other key positions, and shore up the entirety of their hires. All of the legislature is already full gear into what is going to be the long 60-day session. If historical precedent stands, the legislature will sort through some 2,000 bills along with the budget bill during this short period, with key focuses on expansion of revenue streams to cover these number of major funding needs, including transit that we're going to be talking about throughout the year, and take up issues running the gambit from data centers, access to power, among a number of topics, affordable housing, et cetera, that you guys are hearing top of mind from your constituents up there and across the Commonwealth. The legislature will gavel out Sine Die on March 14th, leaving the governor 30 days to act on all bills and the budget. And then we're done, just like that, and easy as that, I'm sure. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but I'm hoping that provides kind of a general outline of what we're going to deal with over the next couple of months and a general outlook of what we're facing down in Richmond.
Seeing how simple and easy it's going to be, I can't imagine there's any question. Yeah, I guess my only comment would be, Henry, if you wouldn't mind just keeping us apprised as committees start getting put together, who the chairs of transportation are going to be and who the key players in the minority side will be on top of the majority.
Right. We absolutely will do. I think the things to watch there are if Democrats do get over 55 seats, which a number of people are saying they may, those committees in the House will grow. They'll get a number of more Democratic seats on that side. And in the Senate side, there's probably going to be some Jenga going on as Senator Hashmi goes, if she is elected lieutenant governor. She currently chairs the Ed and Health Committee. If she goes up, there'll be some moves that probably will change the Transportation Committee chairmanship, and we're watching that. So as soon as we have a little better of an idea of what's going on there, we'll certainly keep you guys apprised of that.
Excellent. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, item number 6, our final item for tonight is a discussion on MVTC's preliminary 2026 legislative and policy agenda. 2026 will be an important year of transit at both the state and federal level, and Commuter Choice and Policy Program Manager Daniel Nickelbein will provide a preliminary look at MVTC's agenda. Mr. Nickelbein.
Thank you, Chair Gary. Before I get into specifics of our legislative agenda, I want to turn it over to Kate for some high-level context on both our agenda and what we're anticipating for the upcoming General Assembly session.
Yeah, and I know, thankfully, I think most of you here are familiar with sort of how NBTC and others approach a legislative agenda. The intent and what we put in the agenda is at a high enough level so that we can be nimble, especially with Virginia over the course of the General Assembly session. And then on the federal side, it's most likely how we may interact with the American Public Transportation Association and others in terms of supporting things that they have going on. So that while there may be a lot of things in granularity, the package that Daniel has put together is intended to try and capture some things, some of which are things we do not actually anticipate may happen, but we've learned over time it's good to put some markers down just in case some things go sideways. So hopefully, Daniel, that helps sort of provide a little bit of context for him to dive in and show what we're putting together now.
And future transit innovation and improvements. On the federal side, our themes are surface transportation reauthorization that supports transit, grant funding programs that enhance transit's future, and that strengthen transit. I'll now go into detail on each of those items. And just a note, the text on the slides here is the same as the handout. So feel free to follow along the handout as I run through those items. So the first item on the list of state priorities is securing long-term sustainable funding for transit that provides adequate growth to meet current and future operating and capital needs for WMATA, VA, and our local bus providers. This item is intended to be broadly stated to address the WMATA operating rebaselining solve future WMATA capital needs and or additional funding for our local Northern Virginia bus operators and BRE. We also reference funding resolutions that outlined NVTC's principles on future transit funding and DMV Move's funding concepts that the Commission passed earlier this year. This first bullet is at the heart of the SJ28 subcommittee's work to identify current and future capital and operating needs for sustaining and enhancing transit and providing recommendations on revenue sources that could be used to meet those needs. Within this first priority, we've included 3 items that help describe that overarching concept further. The next sub-bullet on the state side is 2 things combined: to protect and restore existing state, regional, and local funding for transit, and to proactively address the continuing decline in purchasing power of the regional gas tax. Also included here are 2 items that were part of our previously adopted funding principles, supporting a continued partnership between state and local governments in funding the region's transit providers and ensuring new funding for WMATA and BRE capital is bondable by those agencies. Next are 2 items in the financial management and governance category. Consistent with our adopted resolution in January, the first item advocates for new transit funding to come to NVTC and utilize NVT's financial management and governance structures. This provides several benefits to our localities, as NVTC can provide a vehicle to convey dedicated funding to WMATA and BRE, and we can protect local transit funding in our trust fund accounts. These accounts act like a lockbox, protecting the funding that our jurisdictions use and manage to meet their transit commitments from being used for non-transit purposes. Second part of this item is about enabling NVTC to utilize this funding for programmatic efforts and other resources that would help NVTC fill gaps in the region on issues like transit coordination, research, and project readiness. As NVTC has helped to fill the technical and policy research needs of the SJ28 effort, this has strained our limited research budget and staff and consultant resources. Similar to code language that allows DRPT to use a small percentage of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund for programmatic support of NVTC's use of toll revenues to administer the commuter choice program, this item calls for making sure that the ability to use any new funds to help fill programmatic gaps and conduct funding oversight is enabled in any potential funding solution. And the third part of this bullet is to protect existing NVTC autonomy programs and funding sources. The second item promotes efforts to reform the legislatively mandated 3% growth cap on Virginia's operating assistance to WMATA. As we've noted over the years, the current 3% cap interferes with WMATA's subsidy allocation formulas. These formulas were updated last year to include numerous policy wins for Virginia, including factors for fair evasion and linking the amount of service received by a jurisdiction to the amount of subsidy requested. This item encourages WMATA to continue cost containment efforts while ensuring a cap does not negatively impact service improvements, funding transparency, and accountability. Next slide. Another item we've categorized in the financial management and good governance theme is to ensure that the implementation of new or modified CTB policies closely track their legislative intent and do not negatively affect Northern Virginia's public transit providers. We anticipate that after the 2026 General Assembly session, the CTB will need to address changes made by lawmakers through new or modified CTB policies. And we want to ensure that CTB's implementation of those policies are aligned with the intent of the General Assembly and do not negatively affect Northern Virginia's public transit providers. Within this item are two existing CTB-related policy items that we are currently monitoring. The first you heard about earlier from DRPT staff concerning changes to the merit funding program. In our item, we emphasize the need for funding formulas in merit to be transparent, recognize the diversity of local transit service policy priorities, maximize funding predictability. The second item has been on our agenda for a number of years now, that is strengthening transit's ability to effectively compete for Commonwealth smart scale funding. And the final item on our state priorities list details our support for several transit initiatives and programs, including continued support for Commonwealth investment in rail, the development and implementation of transit innovation, and efforts to streamline the permitting process for bus stop improvement projects. All of these items were on our agenda last year. That concludes our proposed state priorities list. We're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we have Mr. Member.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about the Safety Commission.
Yeah.
And possible request to have a single arbiter. Are we going to need any kind of statutory change for that, the way the Safety Commission was developed? Greg, do we know? I talked to Patty about this a while back, but I can't remember if we're going to maybe need an act of Congress, an act of the legislature. Yeah.
Maryland, DC.
Together, right? I know, but we're talking us.
I think
So we should probably,
we'll dig into
obviously take
I can
some
ask
guidance
Patty,
from,
but we should.
yeah.
I'll ask Patty and I'll let you know.
Yeah, if there's
But I was
anything that we
thinking
need
about
to, with the guidance from WMATA and our board members, to be putting something here at either the state or the federal.
Yeah.
I mean, you said either.
Yeah.
We're happy to, but obviously we take your lead on that, just because we have not typically played in the safety space.
Yeah, I think that, Mr. Chairman, are you done? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there may be several things that might or might not make sense to tie to any funding discussions. That actually might be one. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, separate from funding.
Yeah,
But
related.
Still
related.
important.
Yes. So I did want to ask about one thing that is probably directly related to funding, at least it is now, and that's the bullet on the reform 3%.
Yep.
I guess one thing. Well, there are a couple of thoughts. First of all, more on the technical side, I think the overall idea, I know, of the 3% cap was to account for inflation generally, I think, and
no.
I think that idea was out there, but as written, the current cap.
yeah, cost containment.
Right, yeah, the current cap does not have an inflationary factor.
And that's, well, what I wanted to ask and suggest would be, is there a way that this could be done as an inflation measure? So in other words, somehow, I know we don't know what the CPI is until after the fact. It's a backward looking measure, but could there be some, I don't know, maybe average? Is there a technical way of, because frankly, we've seen inflation in the last few years be pretty darn high, and hopefully it's going back down.
I think the DMV moves.
Yeah.
Nick is looking at a whole
Mhm.
series and they're running models and, so there is,
Some work.
so
being
it's
done on
not
it.
something, one year you've
It's
got
not
10%,
arbitrary.
next year you're
Right.
to.
It's smoothed out, but I guess what I would ask NVTC staff to take a look at any other examples in Virginia law that might sort of operate along those lines. And the other thing is and clearly the cost containment cap that's been put in place to date has applied only to WMATA. So I guess it would also, I think, be helpful to start the discussions about other cost containment strategies for other transit services to be funded. Are there reviews that maybe need to be done? I'm not suggesting anything relatively, anything arbitrary, but I think if we are going to be in the mode of asking for additional money, similar to conditions applied to WMATA, we might also need to start thinking about conditions to our other transit agencies. So just a thought.
I just want to add one technical point. Maryland is similar 3% cap language to Virginia. Theirs does not come back until I believe fiscal 28, whereas Virginia's would come back in fiscal 27. So that is, I think Mr. Smedberg alluded to DMV moves is also having this conversation because it is something regional in nature. And so we intend for this language to be relatively high level, indicating cost containment is important. We just need something that doesn't mess up the metro funding formula, which was hard fought and updated last year. So as far as what the technical answers are, I think there's been a lot of thought behind that, and we hope to hear more from DMV moves, especially if there can be a regional consensus. That can be something that both Virginia and Maryland do, and it doesn't cause any misalignments.
Yeah, and Delegate Corman heads up their transportation committee. It's similar comments. Not necessarily concerns, but just similar comments.
Sure. Other questions, comments? All right, let's go ahead and move to federal, sorry.
So MVTC's primary focus is at the state level in Richmond, though we are monitoring developments impacting transit at the federal level, especially programs authorized by the IIJA, which expire in September 2026. Our first item deals with the transportation reauthorization process anticipated for 2026, outlining MVTC support for reauthorization legislation that maximizes funding for transit systems in Northern Virginia and across the country, continues and expands transit funding programs authorized in the IIJA, and is consistent with reauthorization principles supported by ACTA. This also means supporting efforts to identify funding that address the long-term solvency of the Highway Trust Fund and ensuring that new revenues follow, at a minimum, the traditional 80-20 funding split within the HTF between the highway account and mass transit. The next item on our list is to advocate enhanced funding for discretionary grant programs, including the Capital Investments Grants Program. Congress is currently finishing up the appropriations process for transportation programs in FY 2026. And the House's version cuts CIG funding by $1.7 billion compared to FY 2025 levels. CIG funding is important funding program for transit expansion projects across the country, and here in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County's Richmond Highway BRT project is currently in the engineering phase of the CIG program. We want to ensure the CIG program and other federal programs that support transit capital investments are funded at levels that meet the growing demand for transit capital projects across the country. Finally, we have two items concerning transit policy and regulations. The first is supporting efforts to accelerate the timely and efficient construction of transit projects through the streamlining of statutory and regulatory requirements. And the second is continuing public support for transit commuter tax benefits for both the private and public sectors. And that is our list of proposed federal priorities.
Questions on the federal side? Questions on the federal side? I think we have 2 more slides to go.
A quick rundown of some key dates and the timeline between now and the start of the 2026 General Assembly session. We'll be engaging with jurisdictional staff and legislative liaisons over the next few weeks. And then at next month's joint WMATA Legislative and Policy Committee meeting, we will present a revised draft of the legislative agenda for committee endorsement based on feedback received at today's meeting. On November 6th, Commission will be briefed on the legislative agenda with another joint WMATA Legislative Policy Committee meeting scheduled for November 20th, with a discussion as needed on the Commission's feedback on the legislative agenda from their November 6th meeting. And the Commission will be asked to adopt the agenda at their December 4th. And then one final item to note, as the SJ 28 and DMV moves efforts won't conclude until later this fall, we'll be watching both of those processes for recommendations that could come out of those efforts impacting our legislative work. These are things like streamlining WMATA reporting requirements with impacts to NVTC's work dependent on what the final recommendations look like. Our fall meetings offer an opportunity to review the recommendations of those 2 bodies and integrate their recommendations as appropriate into our legislative and policy agenda. And finally, a quick reminder, save the date for our joint legislative forum with PRTC and BRE held at GMU's Mason Square campus on December 15th. Looking forward to another great discussion this year.
All right. Great. And no questions on those last 2. Okay. So any questions, comments, concerns for the good of the order? Seeing none, just want to remind everybody that our next joint WMATA committee and legislative policy committee meeting is scheduled for October 16th at 7 p.m., not 6 p.m., but 7 p.m. And we'll be in person here at MVTC. So prior to our meeting at 6, please make sure this is on your calendar, as this will be a very important meeting as we plan our strategy for the coming General Assembly session. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
And
Feel better.
Hope you feel better, Mr. Snyder.